of a board would be 19 by 19 lines, and since you play in the intersections and you also play on the edges of the board, then that comes out to you get to play on each of the 19 lines, so the coordinate system works out that way. And it also works out as a benefit because you get to have a center line that is a single line down the center of the board, and that helps orient you. If you've ever seen a board, it will also have a series of dots. Those are called star points, and those will be where the handicap stones are placed.
And so you, folks, or at least in Portland, you walk around, you'd see what people playing this in the, say, like the tea gardens, and it's the, or where else would you actually see this in public, I wonder?
Well, the Chinese Garden, we have, I teach there once a month, first Sunday of the month. And we also have a big group at Powell's, and we play on the weekends at the Lucky Lab on Hawthorne.
Which is a great place for board games.
Yes.
That's been fresh thinking about, geez, over 10 years now coming from it, man, it's been a while.
Yeah, we've been there for a while, and we've had other people that, lots of other board game players there too.
So the game itself, you would say it's pretty much, for a clueless American, i.e. me, audience, it's the Chinese/Japanese game that looks like Othello in terms of you have the grids of white and black round stones or gems and stones.
Stones. For Go it would be stones, and the stones are placed on the intersections, and you providing a little Foley there.
It reads, yep. It reads out quite well.
So they're placed on the intersections, which gives you the benefit of being able to see the lines that are coming out. If you place a single stone on the board, then you'll get 4 lines coming out of that stone. Now, for that stone to be captured, you'd have to surround all 4 lines, as opposed to Othello, where you'd just be getting 2 of the endpoints of a single line.
Right.
And
2-dimensional versus 1-dimensional.
Right. So if you have multiple stones of the same color that are touching along those lines, then those form a group of multiple stones, and that can be pretty much any shape that's orthogonal because it's only connecting along the straight lines. And again, if that whole group gets surrounded on each of the lines, then that whole group gets captured and removed from the board. The object of the game is to surround territory, to surround empty territory as your own, and the game ends when both players pass. And so when both players have passed, then you count up the empty spaces on the board minus the prisoners that have been captured.
How long does an average game usually last?
A casual game lasts something like 45 minutes. It depends on the levels of the game and the speed at which people play. I am an extremely fast player, so my games will be 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the speed of my opponent. And also some people getting around my level will often play very long games because they want to just think about every move, which I should be doing, but
where's the fun in that?
Yeah, it's a lot more fun to play maniacally and watch people just sort of stare and say, how can you possibly play that fast?
There you go. How did you get involved in? What led you to playing Go of all sports? Well, games, as it were.
A friend of mine in high school brought over a board because his father had taught him how to play, and he sort of taught me a couple of the rules. He didn't really understand all the rules, and I certainly didn't understand them at the time. And we played what I can see in retrospect was a completely ridiculous game, where
as what does, kind of just like pieces everywhere, kind of like throwing each other, or almost like Plinko rules where you thwack at each other.
Right. There's a particular rule that prevents you from recapturing a previously captured board position, and we had just a whole field of these shapes where we were capturing back and forth, and just going back and forth in waves. And
so you're almost like playing it like Othello.
Well, no, because this makes a pattern.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
Much cooler looking than Othello.
Yeah, it was just an alternating black and white pattern that I don't think you would be able to have in Othello either, because you wouldn't have the empty spaces for one thing.
That's
and
true.
You wouldn't have the, or at least not as many. Yeah. I played Othello, but I'm not very familiar with it at this point.
Somewhere I still have a little pocket travel Othello received for a family road trip in 1987.
Yeah, right. I remember back in late high school, I had a computer version of Othello, and I did crank it up to the maximum level, and I did beat it. But I don't think I've played it since.
What more can you do?
Yeah.
So so high school, your high school was your first taste of it, as it were.
Yes, and I should add that Othello is a very common comparison in that every time somebody plays, somebody will walk by and say, "Are you playing Othello?" And so that becomes a sort of a common joke among people. But yeah, I played. I played in high school. This was in New England, and my friend's father was a fairly strong player, and he formed a club and started, and I started to go to that, and that's where I really started to get playing against people of his strength and stronger, and then continued that until I went off to college, and where there weren't really a lot of people to play in college where I went to, but went up to UMass and played with somebody there a couple times.
This was like what, UMass, like late 80s, early 90s, or?
Yeah. Circa 30 years ago.
What led you? What drew you to go, as opposed, or I should say, what other games were you playing at the time? Like either board game types, or like video game stuff, or even like pen and paper, RPG, or anything, or what kind of led you into this particular device?
Well, I was a big D&D player, but I don't think that particularly led me into this. I was a big chess player. I was on the chess club in high school around the same, when I got introduced to Go. And I wasn't especially good, but, I was probably moderately, strong for that particular club. It was the high school club. And, my friend introduced this to me, and and it really, really stuck. He actually wrote in his yearbook, I think you're going to be good at this game. And I am, and it's sort of a thing where, like, everybody that knows me knows that I play this game, and the people who don't play know that I'm kind of good, to the point where it's no fun for anybody who doesn't play the game to play me. And yet, I also know professional players to whom, the difference in rank between myself and the top professional player is basically equivalent, or I'm about midway between a beginner and a top professional in terms of the ranking system. And I should probably describe the ranking system.
Sure.
Which is, it starts, it's very similar to a karate ranking system, except that it has a much broader range.
And you don't get the cool belt.
And that's the worst part. I need more belts. But
or little cloisonne pins that you get from that you would similar as I would rank up around that when I was in my favored pastime of the era of visiting various hard rock cafes around the nation, because it was 1990, 91. I was a dumb little 15-year-old white suburban kid who didn't know better.
Yeah, I actually do have a few pins from the Go Congresses, which I could talk about in a bit. But the ranking system starts around 30-35Q, depending. I think they've shifted it down a little bit. And as you get stronger, then the points, the ranking gets lower numerically until you get up to about 1Q, and then from that you would go up to 1 Dan, which is Shodan, which is basically the same as a black belt in karate, and that's about the level where I'm at.
Also a System Shock reference.
Yeah. And
don't worry if you don't get that joke, ladies and gentlemen. Never mind. Yeah.
Yes, well, it'll get you. So, and then from there you can go up to, and that's amateur, and then you go up to about 9 dan amateur, and then 9 dan amateur is something like 1 dan professional, because there are a bunch of professionals out there who, when you say a professional, it's not just somebody who makes money at the game, it's somebody who has studied, usually since childhood, to become incredibly good at the game. And they're just on another level. And then, and then the professional levels go up from 1 dan professional to 9 dan professional. So that's the top rank, and then there's a few title holders which are exceptional in their own way in holding a title.
What's the best title you've ever heard someone achieve or referred to by?
Well, the Honinbo title is probably the most prestigious.
Honinbo?
Honinbo, yeah. It's one of the great one of the great teaching families or houses.
Styles?
Yeah. There are certain styles that'll be played, although, I think it's these days there aren't as many house secrets as there used to be hundreds or 1,000 years ago. And some of the great stories are in reference to those.
Yeah, blame Wikipedia.
Yeah. Well, there's Wikipedia and the fact that every article, every game is recorded and published, and everybody can see it. So yeah.
How does you mentioned that you were a big enough chess player at the time in high school? How what drew you into this game from that made you switch, as it were? Or what was it about this particular game, or I don't know, was it like Providence or Milieu, or?
I'm not sure. I think that it may have. I think in my case, there's probably a degree of just aptitude that I had, but it's which is part of what's different about the games. Go can be a much more organic game. It's a much more shape-oriented game because you've got such a larger field, and it's not as much about each one of the pieces. All of the pieces are the same. There's no distinction between any pieces. And that doesn't help. Writing down notes does not particularly. So each one of the pieces can be sacrificed as well as any of the others. And in fact, you can lose a very large group in the beginning and get a very good result. Not only in terms of psychology, in that you've made your opponent, overconfident, but you can also just get a very good strategic result by sacrificing a large group. Whereas if, in chess, you can get a good result by sacrificing your queen, but you probably know exactly what's going to happen next. If at that level where, okay, I'm sacrificing my queen, and then it's going to be checkmate and X moves or something.
So you think each game has a bit more volatility than the stereotypical high level chess games? Or I never played chess. I preferred checkers.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the far more colorful and far less complicated, and I can be very, very bad at war games, so no Kriegspiel for me. So this is kind of at this point. I don't think I think I have tried some online Go, but I've never actually played it in real life.
Well, yeah. Sorry, I lost the thread of that. What was
both of us.
Just the difference in that?
I guess just relating the different kind of like wanted to just talking about the game and what in particular, what characteristic or what about the game itself, because every game is you interacting with a defined set of systems. What was it about this particular game that drew you in? What attributes, what characteristics of it that got you to the point of wanting to stick with it over time?
Yeah, well, I think that it has. I said earlier that it was organic, and I think that's a lot of it. In particular, my particular approach to it is in learning the different shapes and recognizing what the different shapes are going to, what the ramifications of those are, or whether they're going to be good defensive shapes or whether they're going to be trouble later on. And that's a lot less relevant in chess. In chess, it's a lot about reading out each one of the individual moves. Whereas in Go, you can just sort of set up a lot of different places all over the board where it's going to have different areas of influence and effect. And then you keep playing on later on, and then eventually those are going to have some sort of effect. One player, there's one game that I played maybe 10 years ago where a friend of mine keeps bringing up where she captured a few of my groups or cut them off, and one of my groups cut them off and thought that she had completely captured them. And then I sort of chased another group all the way around the board and then came around to that first set of stones that she thought she had captured and then saved them by doing that. It's just that sort of thing.
And then she threw a bottle at your head because of that.
Well, she wanted to. She has wanted to every time she has seen me since then.
Oh, okay, good. It's good to have history.
Yeah, so it's the scope of the game is one of the big things, and this is one of the reasons why it's been so hard for computers to actually catch up to people. Yeah. There was a famous series of games that happened just earlier this year, where a computer called AlphaGo which came from the DeepMind project, which Google purchased, and
was that an IBM thing, or am I thinking of something else?
You may be thinking of Deep Blue.
Okay.
So they had this game. It defeated a high-level professional in October of last year, and everybody was very impressed by this, but then they were sort of like, well, yeah, but he's not the top professional. He's not the best person in the world. And surely the best person in the world can do better. And so they had this very highly publicized match. A lot of the Go players that I know, including myself, stayed up late to watch these matches because they were happening in Seoul. And they took Lee Sedol, who is arguably the best human player in the world right now, and he had a five-game match, played against him, and then they played the first game, and he was expecting to win, and he did not. And everybody, people weren't entirely shocked. Some people were shocked, but not everybody was entirely shocked. But the computer went on to win the second and then the third match, and then there was sort of this sense among the Go playing community of, well, I guess it's over now.
Yeah, looking this up on the Wikipedia tree, there's a whole section just entitled "Responses to the 2016 Victory Against Lee Sedol." So Lee Sedol. So it's when it's epic enough when it has its own wiki subcategory.
Yeah, but in the fourth game, he did manage to win, and there was much rejoicing, as they say. Yay! And although he did lose again in the fifth round, there was at least still some hope for humanity. And one of the reasons that we can do this, that humans have been insurmountable for so long, is just the sheer, as I say, scope of the game, that the number of possible moves is something like more than the number of atoms in the universe. And I've seen the number written down somewhere, and it was a very, very long number. In addition,
like 2 times 10 to the 30th or something, or
something on that order. But yeah, it's probably right on that.
Yeah. It would not be very small.
No.
All right, and on that note, let us take a break, and we will be right back talking to Glenn about Go, his particular history, its attempts to get a computer to beat a human, and what happened when that finally happened, and a lot of other stuff. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, as if you had a choice. Actually, the last thing I think we were mentioning were the modern AI efforts to defeat the human Go player.
Yes. And Game 4 was won by the human, and Game 5 was another loss. And they're still talking about doing rematches for that.
And this did happen this year, did it not?
Yeah. Just this earlier this year.
This year being 2016, by the way, for future generations who somehow discovered this weird syndicated MP3 on some dead server.
Yes, I always appreciate the dates, and that'll actually come up. If you go into some of the history of the game is somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 years old, and it was invented in China. One of the legends is that it was invented by the sage King Yao to teach his son discipline and military tactics, which goes along with how the game is often applied to a military battlefield situation. And so,
history of the game, talking about how it was developed by the king or emperor, probably emperor by that point.
Right, emperor. And he may have been legend. I'd have to look him up.
Possibly apocryphal, possibly not.
Right, as an origin to the game, it's almost certainly apocryphal.
Right, yeah, print a legend.
Right, but regardless, it's a very old game, and it came over to Japan somewhere around 1000 AD. And so for a millennium, it's been basically a Japanese game, and the name Go is derived from the Japanese name of ego. And most of the terms that we use are also Japanese names, the Tsuji, the Goban, and the Fusaki. All these terms that even Chinese and Korean players use, generally speaking, are all the Japanese names because they were the best at it for so long. And
how do you think the game fared during World War II?
Well, the game did reasonably well. I mean, the game itself did reasonably well during World War II. I think it spread. In terms of movie representations, there's a movie called Heaven Help Us, Mr. Allison, which has a great scene where I think it's Robert Mitchum's character goes off hunting for supplies, and he goes into the Japanese camp, and two of the Japanese soldiers walk back to where he was scrounging for supplies, and they sit down with a go board and they start playing a game.
Sure. Yeah, you're in war territory. That's
right.
Time for a deck of cards.
Yeah. So he's hiding on a shelf somewhere in the shadows, and they're playing a game, and then they finally play the game, and they're drinking, and then you see one guy who's like, I give up, and then the other's like, oh, another game. You see Robert Mitchum, like, oh yeah, and so yeah, that's one cultural representation. There's also a movie called The Go Masters, which is a joint Japanese and Chinese epic about that's set during World War II that has a kid who is this prodigy of a player, and he gets taken. I think he gets taken from China to Japan before World War II, and is taught by this one guy there, and left by and has to leave his father still in China. And so the whole thing is just this sprawling epic movie of these two families, and then won't get very, very dramatic.
Sprawling dramatic about the history of the game.
Yeah.
I'm curious if the much like America during the couple of world wars over here, we had hell even during the same kind of habit popped up later, but they would rename like common food. As I said, they wouldn't call it sauerkraut; they'd call it German cabbage because German enemy or something. So I was always curious if you had Chinese and Korean players during World War II playing against playing a game that was now dominated by the occupying army.
I don't know of any of that. I mean, I know that in modern times, Mao had basically, he sort of wiped out a lot of the intellectuals, but he was also responsible for supporting one of the strong players. I've read his book, Nai Wei-ping, who became a very strong player in the 70s or thereabouts, and so yeah, I actually supported as a matter of national pride, and it was around this time that a lot of the Japanese players had tended to fall away from playing so much, and so by the time I started playing, it was basically known as an old man's game in Japan. And
culture is a weird thing.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't until that they came out with Hikaru no Go, which is a manga and anime series that really helped popularize it again. It really, not only in Japan but also here, it had this wide cast. It's, for those who are not familiar, this would have to be the main recommendation for the podcast.
Hikaru
Hikaru no Go.
Hikaru no Go.
And I apologize for any of my pronunciation here.
And
which is the story of a young boy who gets possessed by the spirit of a great Go master, who, according to the story, is basically the same guy that played the games of Honinba Shusaku, who is just the legendary player of Go history.
Gotcha. Okay. Apparently, the manga hit in about 98. The anime series started around about 3 years later.
Yeah. And all of the characters in that, it's interesting, all the characters that are listed in there are fictional. A lot of the games that are actually played are actually real historical games. And except that there's one person's name that I caught on rereading it recently, who was actually somebody that I had played, a professional player that I'd played during my years in going to the Go congresses.
That's different. You've mentioned the congresses before. Can you talk about congresses and say, because I keep hearing I keep hearing Congress, and modern dork, I think I'm kind of curious, how does a Congress match up with a con?
Well, there's a lot less cosplay. We have...
Well, then what's the point?
Well, you get to play all the time.
Hey, if it don't have, if it doesn't have camera bait, dressing up in themed and badly licensed characters...
Well, I confess, I haven't been to one for about 8 years now, so maybe they're doing that now. And there is a merchandise table, so there are merchandise rooms, so you can buy a lot of stuff, which I always did. And so yeah, the cons are the congresses. You're polluting my mind with your terminology. The congresses are in a different city each year. There's the U.S. Congress, which is the only one that I've managed to go to. Where there's a European Congress, and I'm sure there's one in Canada too, I think. And so there's several hundred people that go to these, most of whom participate in the U.S. Open, which is a game that's played every day in the morning, and that's basically the big game that you have, the big tournament that it pits everybody against each other. You know, there are different bands of players, and you'll have at the top you'll have professional level players, and then at the bottom you'll have just beginners who are also starting out, and that helps keep all the ratings even.
How does the scene? Have you ever seen any of the? I believe these are. I mean, they're streamable now, but once any of the documentaries that came out, like 05 on after about let's say national conventions for American board games, like there was the documentary, the wordplay documentary that came out about the New York Times crossword, and at one point followed around several people who came together in I think it was Stanford to play. And there was a later one that focused on Scrabble players. Have you seen any of those? I'm just kind of curious if in terms of national gatherings of dedicated aficionados coming together to play it together.
I have not seen those. I probably should, but I think there's one going on with Go that somebody's doing some crowdfunding to try and get that published. But no, I don't think we've seen anything like that. It's a little bit too much of a niche, topic, because while when I started to play, there were basically maybe a dozen books in English, and now there are hundreds, easily. And there was just those few movie references, which I'd mentioned a couple of them, and now you see it in reasonably often. It appeared in an episode of Criminal Minds. When the first episodes of one of those
type of shows that I have never seen an episode of Criminal Minds. So.
It was. But there was an episode where they found the home of the killer.
What kind of game is it?
In China, it's called Wei Qi. Here we call it Go. It's considered to be the most difficult board game ever conceived.
Chairman Mao required his generals to learn it.
It also looks like he's playing himself.
How can you tell?
And they looked at the Go board and they said, "Oh, I can see from this that this guy really is a real violent mind, because he plays basically the way I do, on the board."
This might provide an advantage, actually. Go is considered to be a particularly psychologically revealing game. There are profiles for every player: the conservative point counter, the aggressor, the finesser.
What kind of player is this?
Extreme aggressor.
And that does not translate to real life, I don't think.
No, it's a modern American TV procedural.
Right.
Why be based in reality when you can print a legend?
No, indeed. One of the things that I'd mentioned before the movie The Go Masters, which is the movie the movie itself is from the 70s, and when the movie, these days, I ask people if they've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, which came out in 2000 or something. I had just come back from the Denver Go Congress in 2000, so that's my frame of reference, where I had met the American professional Janice Kim, and she knew that I had a copy of this movie, The Go Masters, which is fairly rare. I had bought it on VHS.
Was it bootleg? It was like bootleg tape, or
it was not bootleg.
Really?
It was just rare.
Oh wow!
It was. I know of 3 copies that were in Portland, and one of them was a trilogy. One of them was another Go player up in Vancouver, and one was me. So
dubbed or subbed?
I think it was subbed. Pretty sure it was subbed. Actually.
Thank God.
Yeah.
At least at least some trends of the '90s never died.
Right. They started making this movie, A Beautiful Mind, and they contacted her as a consultant. And she contacted me because she knew that I had a copy of this movie. So I sent her my copy of the movie. She bundled that up with some boards and some equipment for them. And the cast of that movie, including Russell Crowe, watched my VHS copy of The Go Masters to actually prepare for the Go scenes in A Beautiful Mind.
Nice, letting us go for one day. I hate this kind of cowards, all of you. None of you rise to meet my challenge? Come on, Bender. Whoever wins, Saul does his laundry all semester. That's not fair to anyone else. Not at all. Look at him. Nash, taking your reverse constitutional. I'm hoping to extract an algorithm to define their movement. Nash, I thought you dropped out. You ever gonna go to class? Classes will dull your mind. Destroy the potential for authentic creativity. Oh, I didn't know that. Nash is gonna stun us all with his genius. Which is another way of saying he doesn't have the nerve to compete. Scared? Terrified. Mortified, petrified, stupefied by you.
Which then turned out to be kind of terrible in the way that anything is if you are an expert in the thing that they are talking about in a movie.
No starch. Pressed and folded. Let me ask you something, John. Be my guest, Mark. Bender and Saul here correctly completed Alan's proof of prose conversion. Adequate work. Without innovation. I'm flattered. You're flattered? Flattered. And I've got 2 weapons briefs under security review by the DOD. Derivative trouble. But Nash achievements? 0. I'm a patient man, Martin. Is that an actual question? What if you never come up with your original idea? Huh? How will it feel when I'm chosen for Wheeler? And you are not.
Yeah, and it's funny because in Hikaru no Go, they solved this by using actual game recordings of real famous games. So they knew that the games made sense, to some degree. Whereas, as far as I can tell, in A Beautiful Mind, they just sort of, I don't quite know what they were doing because he let a group get captured and he said, "Oh, this game is terrible. I can't deal with this. This is the worst game ever."
What if you lose? You should not have won. I had the first move. My play was perfect. The hubris of the defeated. The game is flawed. Gentlemen, the great John Nash.
Well, so it shows up in American Mind, portrayed about as accurately as one could expect. I checked it out. It is released. Film came out in December of '01. Directed by
Ron Howard.
Yeah, directed by Ron Howard. Partially written by Kiva Goldman. So.
Yeah. Well, another famous at the time, or at least prominent movie that had Go in it was the movie Pi.
The ancient Japanese considered the Go board to be a microcosm of the universe. Although, when it is empty, it appears to be simple and ordered. The possibilities of gameplay are endless.
Which just had another wonderful scene where he's playing, the main character is playing with his mentor, and they're playing very seriously on a Go board. And I know they also consulted, serious players for this. And he just places a move very clearly, close-up move, right against a giant wall of his territory that's already a couple stones thick, which, if you know anything about the game, you know that makes no sense whatsoever. It's basically a negative move.
Yeah, it looks cool, and that's all the sense that it needs to make.
Yes. Yeah, if we go back, I was mentioning some of the famous games that they used in Hikaru no Go.
Okay.
And some of those, some of these have famous names. There's the blood coughing game, which is also sometimes known as the blood vomiting game. It was played by...
Literal or figurative?
Well, that's the thing. There was Honinbo Jowa, who was at the time, this is 1800s. In fact,
let us date these games of antiquity.
Yeah, this is played in 1835.